good evening. I'm calling to order the meeting of the City of Salem Budget Committee for January 5th in the year 2022. Will the recorder please call the roll?
Member Stapleton?
Here.
Chair Tigan?
Here.
Secretary Tom Anderson? Absent. Member Chirac?
Here.
Member Phillips?
Here.
Member Leung?
Here.
Member Cohen?
Here.
Member Gonzalez?
Here.
Member Brown?
Here.
Member Hoy?
Here.
Member William Anderson? Absent. Member Nordyke?
Here.
Member Source?
Present.
Member Lewis?
Here.
Member Milton? Absent. Member Bennett?
Here.
Member Vera Brandel?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Could you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Tonight, we'd like to welcome 3 new citizen members to the committee: Evan Storrs from Ward 7, Andrew Cohen from Ward 4, and Stacy Vera Brandel, our at-large member. Welcome all. Thank you for coming tonight. Our first order of business is the public testimony. This is an opportunity for virtual public testimony. The committee has been provided in their agenda packets any written public testimony that came in before 3 p.m. this afternoon. If we have any speakers tonight, they will have 3 minutes and staff will indicate when there is 1 minute remaining. Mr. Eggleston, do we have any public testimony this evening?
No, we do not, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. We will move on to our second order of business, the minutes. Approving minutes from the May 5th, 2021 City of Salem and Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee meeting. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the May 5th, 2021 meeting?
I move approval of the May 5th, 2021 meeting minutes.
Thank you, Member Hoy. I have a motion on the floor for Member Hoy. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Leung. We have a second from Member Leung. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Okay, seeing no discussion, all those in favor can signify by saying aye.
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 Do we have any opposed this evening? Seeing no opposition, the motion passes. Thank you. Moving quickly ahead into our third action item for the evening, election of officers. The next item on the agenda is for the election of officers. Nominations are now in order for the office of chairperson. Do we have any nominations from the floor for chairperson of the City of Salem Budget Committee? Member Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I nominate Member Virginia Stapleton for chair.
Second.
Thank you, Member Hoy and Member Phillips. Are there other nominations for the position of chair? Okay, the nomination is for Member Stapleton as chairperson. If you are in favor of Member Stapleton as chair, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
If there is any opposition, please signify by saying no. Okay. Thank you, member, and now Chairperson Stapleton.
Thank you so much, everybody. It's an honor. So thank you very much for the nomination and the vote. I'll try and do my best, taking this up after Paul Tigan is kind of quite the task. He's done an awesome job for us the last couple of years. And so big shoes to fill for me. I'll try and do my best. So next on our agenda is nominations for our office of vice chairperson. Are there any nominations?
I have a nomination.
Thank you, Paul.
I would like to nominate Member Brown.
We have, thank you. Second by Chirac. Is there, let's see here. Is there any other nominations? Seeing none, if you are in favor of Member Brown, please signify by saying aye.
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 If you are opposed, please signify by saying no. Seeing none, this passes, and we have our Vice Chairperson Brown. Thank you so much for serving in this capacity. Next up, we have nominations are in order for the new Office of Secretary. Are there any nominations? Member Hoy.
I'll nominate Member Lewis.
Thank you, Member Hoy. We've nominated Member Lewis. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Phillips. Is there anybody else? Seeing none, if you are in favor of Member Lewis serving as a secretary, please signify by saying aye.
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 If you are opposed, please signify by saying no. And this passes. Welcome, Member Lewis, as our secretary. Thanks for serving. We are now moving on to information items. I would like to ask our budget officer, Eggleston, to review the information items under agenda item 4 and present the 5-year forecast under the agenda heading Special Orders of Business.
Thank you, Chair Stapleton. I'm going to share my screen. Good evening. I'm Josh Eggleston, the Interim Chief Financial Officer, also the Budget Officer. The information for this evening's meeting include 4 quarterly financial summaries. I won't be reviewing these tonight, but they are provided for your information as part of the city's discipline of monitoring, analysis, and reporting. The main focus of our time this evening is the city's 5-year financial forecast. I would like to recognize and thank the department analysts, directors, and staff that dedicated the hours necessary to assist the Budget Office in producing this important financial planning document. The city forecast for 14 funds of a total of 25 funds. All the ones with people in them are ones we forecast for. But tonight we'll focus on 3 of those funds: transportation services, the utility, and the general funds. Why we forecast. Forecasting is a way that the city can identify financial issues before they become critical. The forecast is an important step in the budget process and integral to the Budget Committee's advisory role to the City Council. The forecast is meant to inform your important work when reviewing and recommending the fiscal year 2023 budget in a few short months. The forecast does not predict the future, but demonstrates financial trends and imbalances. The goal of sustainable service delivery, which continues to be prominent in the Council's strategic plan, is the alignment of city services and resources and maintenance of a fund balance for the future. By modeling this baseline forecast, we can provide the Budget Committee, City Council, and our community members with a long-range perspective of today's financial decisions. And please, if you have a question throughout the presentation, just feel free to chime up at the chair's discretion. We have a lot of material to cover, and it's probably better to take questions during than at the end.
Josh, before you get started, can I just say, if folks have the ability to raise their hand over in the participants area, that would probably be best for me since I can't see everybody with the presentation.
Perfect. The forecasts presented this evening are built around a set of assumptions that represent a reasonable level of consistency with the status quo. We believe the forecasts are objective, but there are bound to be variations from the estimates. It's done at a very granular level. Property tax information is received from the counties, both Polk and Marion, and individual properties are compared year over year. We've had some good results and highly accurate estimates over the past several years with this approach. The largest expense for the city is personnel costs. These are calculated at the position level to enhance accuracy. We use annual market adjustments for salaries and employee rates containing labor agreements where applicable. The COVID-19 pandemic and its economic impacts continue to present uncertainty in the city budget and forecast, as I'm sure you're aware, and in our personal lives as well. The forecast assumes that the revenues impacted by the pandemic are largely recovered by the beginning of fiscal year 2023 or July 1st. But with due variance and case fluctuations, we really don't know. In addition, you may have noticed in your personal budget, the cost of materials and supplies is on the rise. This has caused us to use a higher escalator early in the forecast with a lesser one later in the forecast to recognize these increases. The Public Works Department's Transportation Services Fund supports the operation and maintenance of the city's streets, traffic signals, and sidewalks. The Transportation Services Fund provides the financial structure for the department to respond to the city council goals that address long-term support of community needs for safety, livability, environmental health, and economic development. Additional detail for this forecast can be found beginning on page 19 of the forecast document. On this side, the blue bars represent revenues and the gray bars represent net expenditures. Just a little detail there. Net expenditures are the total expenditures less anticipated savings. The green line using the right axis represents the fund balance. And to orient you a little bit, the blue bar corresponds to the revenue line here, gray bar corresponds to net expenditures, and this green line corresponds to this row here and the right axis, just to make sure we're clear. So it's two different scales. It's overlaid on the same graph just for ease of display.
Good. Had a question?
Yeah.
Virginia had a question. Thank you. Josh, could you explain then where that deficit or that shortfall is occurring on this green line? Where's it happening exactly?
There's no deficit on this screen.
Okay.
No, this fund stays healthy. So if you'll notice, the beginning fund balance in year one is 5.8 million, going down to 2.6 over the forecast period.
Now have we had shortfalls in transportation? It seemed like we had.
So the Transportation Service Fund has been fluctuating quite a bit. As you might imagine, the COVID-19 pandemic has wreaked havoc on the traveling, and the main funding source for this fund is the state highway revenue. The gas tax is the major one. So we've seen a lot of fluctuations there, but we've seen some recovery there over the last little bit. And then also the one-time federal relief with the American Rescue Plan funds for revenue replacement, as well as FEMA insurance proceeds from the 2021 ice storm. And they've contributed to that healthier beginning fund balance that you see here in year one.
Okay. So we'll see for the next 5 years, we're in good shape on transportation fund.
The current service level will continue. So the current level of maintenance for sidewalks and streets. And I'm sure Peter could chime in about that level of service. It might not be what everyone would like, but it is continuing the current service level.
Yeah, if I may, real quick, Peter Fernandez, Public Works Director. Thank you, Josh, and thank you, Mayor, for asking. We are healthy with respect to the fact that there's no crisis. So we're able to do, as Josh says, what we're doing today. What we're not doing today, and what I'd like to remind the Budget Committee of, is we're really not doing a whole lot of pavement maintenance. So we really rely on, a future bond issue to do the heavy duty bond maintenance. We could certainly do more sidewalk. Last year before last, we moved our Safer Crossings program to the capital budget to use the last remaining funds of the 2008 bond issue for those things. And recall a few years ago, council adopted the streetlight fee that saved this fund a couple $1 million a year. So we've been doing some things, and you see that green line going down as that gray bar is higher than the blue bar. So At some point, we do need to address the revenue of this fund. So I don't want to say that the fund is in great shape, but we're not. There will not be a crisis in the next 5 years.
And just to add a little bit, you might remember the budget committee, you all recommended that the city council look at some revenue measures a couple of years ago. That task force that the council formed did recommend the gas tax as one of the revenue measures, and that would directly contribute to this fund, allowing that pavement maintenance that Peter mentioned. And I have one more slide here on transportation, if there's no other questions right now. This display of potential variability, which I'll show for each of the three funds, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on it now just to orient you. The probable result, which is displayed in the forecast document, and the previous slide is represented by the blue bars. The green bars is augmenting it by 1% of additional revenue and 1% of additional expenditure savings, a total of a 2% positive change. So a pretty minimal shift for the fund, and it shows that more positive result. Going the other way, the more pessimistic outcome, 2% less savings and 2% more expense is represented in these red bars. And as you can see, in this case, the fund would go negative in year 5 of the forecast. And all this is here is just to represent that small shift can have a huge impact on these funds. I mean, we're talking about a large amount of dollars that fluctuates. So as we saw with the downturn with the COVID pandemic, a slight downward trend in that revenue has a big impact. So this is just 2% change. Of course, what you saw in the previous slide is those green bars. And that concludes transportation. I'm happy to address any additional questions here before we move to the utility.
Do any of the members have any questions?
Chair Stapleton, this is Member Tyken. I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
I think about that forecast that into 2027, and also the idea that the vehicle base is going to be shifting over that time as well towards more electric vehicles and less gas utilization. So did you build any of that into your forecast, or do you also forecast that the state will come up with some way for us to recoup some ability to maintain the transportation system through electric vehicles?
Peter, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you, Member Tygen. We use the ODOT's forecast for the State Transportation Trust Fund. So they are incorporating those issues into their forecast, and then we just accept that. Just by way of information, ODOT is experimenting with a pay by vehicle mile program, and I would anticipate that in the next few years they will roll that out more completely as electric cars become more ubiquitous.
Thank you.
I see Member Lewis has his hand up.
Thank you, Member Lewis. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to see if it worked. So I think this is the right place for this question. Remind me of the amount that we've been putting into the sidewalk repair and replacement. I know that we've increased that over the years, but what that amount is, and does that stay constant or go up this next year?
Councilor, I think we are at we're over $1 million, but I don't know if it's 1.0 or 1.1. It has remained fairly constant over the last few years. A few years ago, we added another small crew, what Mark Bechtel called the flying squad, to address the small issues. So they've been working, and then we continue to do our the improvements throughout the city.
And that remains the same for this year?
Yes, that will remain the same for this year.
And just a little more detail, it was 1.7 in the previous years, so it's been increased to 2 million in this forecast.
Okay, so it's a lot more than I recall. That's good news.
That is good news. Please bear with me as I try and scroll to all these different pages and make sure everybody is getting their questions asked. So please speak up if I'm not seeing you. Josh, I think we can move on to the next section.
Excellent. Thank you. The utility fund is the next fund we're going to be talking about. It supports the ongoing operation and maintenance of the utility, including treatment, storage, and delivery of drinking water to residents, businesses, and industries, collection, conveyance, and treatment of wastewater before it's returned to the Willamette River, and collection and conveyance of stormwater runoff from streets, buildings, and other hard surfaces throughout the system to reduce the risk of flooding and protect the environment, especially important this week. In addition, the fund supports the payment of utility revenue bonds for system infrastructure improvements, as well as the annual transfers to capital improvements fund for pay-as-you-go capital projects. Additional detail for this fund can be found beginning on page 28 of the forecast document. The city's utility is financially stable, largely due to the consistent small rate increases and the measured, constant, and deliberate approach of the operation, maintenance, and expansion of the utility systems. Lost revenues from customers impacted by the pandemic has been offset by increased consumption in some customer classes and other one-time reimbursements. This forecast includes capital transfers for the Public Works Operations Building and debt service for the $60 million debt issuance in March of 2020 for the ozone, water treatment, and a supplemental water supply improvement. Continued improvements must be made to the utility at a sustainable pace, balancing rate impacts with the rehabilitation, expansion, resiliency, and modernization needs of the system. Almost every year, some form of emergency impacts revenues or expenditures, and maintaining proper reserve levels allows for a response without an urgent rate increase. Examples include the 2008 water advisory, 2019 pandemic, and cost increases due to supply chain and inflation, the 2020 wildfires, 2021 ice storm and heat wave, as well as the occasional rain events, flooding, and water main breaks. Similar display of the transportation fund. The one difference here is we've overlaid the fund balance policy on this display. Again, the green bar represents a 2% positive result, and the red bar represents a 2% negative variable there. In all cases, for the green and the blue bars, they stay above that fund balance policy. But as you can see, beginning with 2024, the fund balance for the red bars does fall below that fund balance policy. And that concludes the utility. I'm happy to address any questions anyone might have, and I'll stop sharing.
Any questions on this? Shirok, Member Shirok, please.
Thank you. You mentioned, I heard the word reimbursement. Do any revenues in our current fiscal year 22 or expected for 23 include ARPA funds that could be used to reimburse lost fees from utilities?
It's a good question. So we've seen reimbursement from the ice storm for this fund as well. So if you remember, for the ice storm, Public Works pooled all their employees, parks, transportation, and utility. So the reimbursement is some for those utility employees, stormwater specifically, that we're working on those cleanups. It does include some ARPA reimbursement for lost revenue, so that is included in the forecast as well. Just the one time in the current year.
Chris Stapleton, I have a question, please.
Please, go ahead.
So Josh, I have a question. So at the bottom of page, 29? At the bottom of page 29, I just need you to walk me through this last paragraph where it talks about our delinquencies. And you mentioned in there that there's like $400,000 has been received or anticipated to be received with one more month remaining. Can you kind of walk me through as to what that's going to look like now that we are in January of 2022?
Sure, I'd be happy to attempt it, and then Public Works might have more information. So City Council deferred water shutoffs for quite a while when the pandemic first started. So about a year ago now, Basically what happened is 1.27 million was taken out of the public works system. Got muted, sorry.
I think you're still muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
I don't know what was going on, but I won't touch the keyboard. 1.27 million was brought into the finance in our accounts receivable section, and they invoiced on a monthly basis for those payments. They didn't cause water shutoffs. What we did is if someone didn't pay, we sent it to collections. With 1 month, as it mentioned, we received of that 1.27 million, about 400,000. We have 1 month to go, and then the balance will be sent to collections and written off from the utility.
And do you anticipate it's going to be higher than the 870?
So as it's received at collections, we do receive revenue from there. It would come back from the utility as bad debt recovery. So it's written off, and then we bring it back in as bad debt recovery after that has been expensed.
Got it. But until then, our budget takes the hit, right? We just have enough cushion in there to cover for it. Is that how that works?
That's correct. So 1.27 million is a large number, but in relation to the entire utility, it's a relatively small amount. And I use that term lightly.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. And I can see Peter nodding. So thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it.
I had similar questions to Josh earlier today, so it's a good one. I don't see any other hands raised. Do we want to move on to the next one?
The next, just making sure I wasn't muted. The next one is the general fund. It supports the operations in the areas of public safety, planning, code enforcement, public library, municipal court, parks and recreation, urban development, and support services. This chart displays the general fund supported departments and the corresponding expenditure budget for the year one of the 5-year forecast period. So that'd be fiscal year 2023. This next budget year that would start July 1st. Additional detail for this forecast can be found on page 8 of the forecast document. The forecast maintains the same services of the status quo without adding any new programs. To be clear, the continuation of the current unsheltered programs being funded using state or federal funds are not included in the forecast. Those programs, they're not included in the general fund forecast. They're being used for the ARPA and other state funding. And then just a little bit more on that, the American Rescue Plan Act funding has been fully allocated to replace lost revenue, and we'll go over that a little bit more for the general fund. And then along with the unsheltered programs, it's been allocated 8.1 million for sheltering and then 2.3 million for affordable housing. In the general fund, the revenue budget totals 149.7 million compared to the total budgeted expenditures of 160.9 million. Property taxes make up over half of the general fund at 80.8 million forecasted for fiscal year 2023. For comparison, in the same year, the combined police and fire budgets that we just saw on the previous slide equal $95.1 million. Here's a snapshot of the general fund. On the left, you can see the beginning balance of approximately 30.9 million beginning in fiscal year 2022. That's the current budget year. We show the year-end estimate there. We're projected to add approximately 5.2 million and end with 36.1 million as a result. And you can see that here in the second column. This add to the fund balance is largely due to the infusion of American Rescue Plan Act or ARPA funds that are replacing lost revenues due to the COVID-19 pandemic and being used to continue essential services. These one-time revenues have stabilized the budget in the short term, but as you can see, the gray bars in the out years are greater than the blue bars and show this ongoing structural imbalance. We've avoided tables to this point, but here's a table similar to the slide that appears on the forecast document on page 11. I'll walk through it a little bit. At the top, you see the beginning fund balance. You can call that the city's checking account for the general fund. That's cash available. Revenue, so this is the amount you saw on the previous slide for property taxes, franchise fees, and all the other general fund revenues. The total expenditures here, which is the total budgeted expenditures, as opposed to the net expenditures, which I mentioned earlier, we take out unspent contingency and a 2.5% savings expectation. So we budget $3 million of contingency. We generally expect to use $500,000. The last couple of years, it's been more, but we're hoping to get back to where we're not using it as much. So $2.5 million we expect to save from contingency. And then the 2.5% savings is just organic savings. You know, so we budget for every position in the city, and inevitably some are vacant. There's transitions, a senior employee leaves and a more junior employee comes on. So there's some natural savings there. The fiscal year impact row, this is the change in the fund balance. So as I mentioned, the 5.2 is increasing here in the current year, projected to increase. And then we're anticipated to consume for the balance of the forecasts, stabilizing in the last 3 years between $8 and $9 million. And just to be clear, in this last year, the forecast, we wouldn't be able to adopt the budget. We can't budget for more expenses than we have resources for, so it just wouldn't work. For some of you, this may be familiar and seem like deja vu to presenting a forecast that is dire in the out years. For Salem and for most cities, there continue to be more needs than funds available. This leads us to operate in a constrained fiscal environment where the general fund is constantly squeezed as costs increase at a greater rate than revenues. Any questions on this slide before I move on?
Member Bennett?
Thank you, Chair. Could you kind of explain, Josh, what's going on? You see 22 with 156.56 in revenue, then this fairly precipitous drop to 149.72 that doesn't really recover again. Just looking at kind of what's going on, it doesn't seem like it recovers for at least a few years in terms of just percentages. What's going on there? What are your assumptions there?
And that's due to the one-time ARPA revenue. And I actually have a slide and a couple slides to really go over that in detail.
So ARPA is how much is ARPA contributing then to this year's budget?
So I'm just going to skip to this slide here. So in 2021, we received $10.3 million between CARES and ARPA funds. So that was a one-time infusion of revenue into the general fund. And then for the current year, fiscal year 2022, we anticipate $9.6 million. So a fairly sizable portion, just about $20 million contributed to the general funds.
Okay.
And this does, the majority of this falls under the ARPA revenue replacement. So they have a very convoluted calculation that you have to do, aggregate across the whole entire city. And this is how we can use it to continue those services that allows us to stabilize the budget, at least in the short term.
Are those funds pretty well allocated by federal guidelines? I mean, is that fairly tight on how that money's available?
There's different buckets you can use the funds in. The city council has allocated the ARPA funds completely. So there's no discretionary funding left. It would, if there was a shift, it would be reallocating, but they've all been allocated either to sheltering, affordable housing, revenue replacement, or direct COVID response.
Okay, so there is no money there available for new and different programs, is what you're saying. It's really in the program.
That is correct. And if there were, Mr. Mayor, I'd recommend it only for one-time programs.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Going back just a little bit. I see one hand raised.
Yeah, go ahead, Evan. Sorry, member source.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a quick question. I think, Josh, you answered it, but this is assuming current service level before pandemic, correct? This isn't assuming current service level during the shutdowns or anything like that, correct?
Great question. So the city of Salem being a very service-oriented organization, most of our operations continued without much change during the pandemic. Police, fire, public works all continued to operate. We saw some one-time savings perhaps during early on in the pandemic when there was some nervousness about bringing other employees on virtually. But largely we've recovered from that, and we're in a good place. So we're not seeing that kind of vacancy savings anymore. Operations are continuing as normal. And then, as I mentioned when I talked about revenue, we're projecting, and who really knows if it'll happen, but the revenue is returning to a pre-COVID level starting with July 1st.
Okay, just a quick follow-up if I can, Chair.
Please do.
So specifically around like the library, for example, which was shut down for part of the pandemic. So I'm assuming that because the library was shut down for a chunk, you don't need as much staff during that time. So there should have been some savings there, but we're not basing current service level of the library based on that time period. We're basing it based on assuming that it's open for the full year. So we're not assuming the same kind of staffing and service that we were expecting during the pandemic is kind of where my question was.
Good question. So the library never shut down. They offered a different service delivery, either through ebooks or they did the curbside for a portion. What we saw there is what we saw in other departments. They just simply didn't fill vacancies until they were fully open. But we didn't lay off or furlough any employees.
Okay, thank you.
And just to make it really clear, so all general fund employees throughout all the forecasts, they're costed 100%. So they're included in the budget here at that full service delivery level.
Thanks.
Moving on, this next slide will be familiar. The City Council and the Budget Committee have a strong history of fiscal management. They use both reductions in expenses and increases in revenues to balance the budget. This graph illustrates recent revenue and expenditure history in the general fund and the result of the current 5-year forecast. It notes impact of several significant actions over the past 10 years, including the closure of fire stations, elimination of approximately 40 positions in the fund about 9 years ago, 4 years of some legislative PERS rate relief. During that same period of PERS rate relief, right after the recession, we also gained revenue from a real market valuation reset and significantly less property tax losses from compression. You'll also see the reopening of the 2 fire stations in fiscal year 2017 and 2019, as well as the start of the homeless rental assistance program. And then beginning in fiscal year 2020, we see the positive impact of the city operations fee that narrowed the gap between revenues and expenses. And then you'll see the one-time infusion of the CARES Act and ARPA funding in fiscal years 2020, 2021, and 2022.
Chair, I have a question for Officer Eccleston.
Thank you. Go ahead, Member Brown.
Okay, so Josh, this is the chart that just kind of threw me for a loop because I see where we reopened both of the firehouses back, and like a decade ago, we kind of reduced the workforce by 40 positions. So since then, do we know how many of those jobs have come back?
That's a good question. I don't have that data with me, but a lot of that was related to the 2 fire stations. So those staff were reinstated with that change there. And then we've added positions over the years, but I don't have that today. That's something I could bring back during your budget committee meetings in April and May if you'd like to see that.
Okay, so what you're really saying is when those 2 houses closed, most of those staff were with those 2 houses.
I can't say that for sure.
Okay.
There were a portion of them. It wasn't 40 employees, so there were other positions that were included in that reduction, and there was a previous reduction that's not displayed on this slide as well.
Oh, got it. Okay, yeah, I would love to know like how many of those are we considering on bringing back, and what kind of impact will that have on the budget? As we kind of like go through the next couple of years or whatever. So.
So I can address that. So the current service delivery, the current level of employees are maintained throughout this forecast period. We really treat it as that baseline forecast. So as the city management, as Steve, Kristen, the leadership team considers any changes to staffing, it'll be overlaid on this forecast to see the impacts. And then for the budget committee also, you can see the impacts as we meet in April and May.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. I want to highlight the city operations fee again. We talked about it last year. I did the same display, but I think it's important to note this positive impact to the 5-year forecast. This body, the budget committee, as I mentioned earlier, recommended the city council look at new revenues, and the city council formed the Sustainable Service Revenue Task Force. This group recommended 2 general fund revenue measures back to the city council. The city operations fee was the first of the 2 measures. And on the slide in green, I've separated the city operations fee from the other general fund revenues so you can see the impact. And then the inverse to demonstrate the significant positive impact of the city operations fee on our financials in the previous slide. This removes it from the display of the forecast, and you can see without the city operations fee, we would go negative fund balance by fiscal year 2024 in just 2 short years. So just to emphasize, financial forecast is important. You can see those challenges ahead of time. The budget committee made an appropriate recommendation. The city council formed this revenue task force, implemented it, and it's gained us this revenue to get the forecast out even further. Then the federal relief. I talked briefly about this, but just again, I wanted to convey the impact of the one-time CARES Act and ARPA funding for the general fund. And just to reiterate, one-time revenues are tough. It helps the cash flow in the short term, but it doesn't help that structural imbalance. So you still have this negative use, this deficit spending out in the 3 out years of the forecast.
Member Stapleton, may I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Member Tigan.
I'm sorry, Chair Stapleton. Josh, I guess I just want to dive into the CARES and ARPA funding a little bit and maybe kind of compare it to our favorite chart on page 10, the revenue and expenditure history and forecast. I guess I would expect to see over the course of 2 fiscal years, even on a chart like this, that $20 million to be a little bit more of a substantial bump than it is, and that we would end up back closer to where we were in, I don't know, 2020. Like it's, I don't know, it just doesn't seem, it doesn't seem like the graph tells the whole story.
Sorry, go ahead.
If you want to respond to that part, I kind of have a second question.
Sure, you're absolutely right. This is just one look at the situation. So the imbalance, we're showing the expenditures and revenues. So you'll see in the inverted expenditures and revenues, you'll see the gray bar being over the blue bar here. The operations fee fixed that here. And then in 2020, 2021 and 2022, you see an increase in that spread that represents those one-time ARPA funds, if that makes sense. At the same time, we've seen increases in expenditures. So PERS rates are continuing to increase. If you follow that at all, we've seen a assumed rate reduction. So they assume a rate on their investments. It was 7.2, it's down to 6.9. So employers are required to make up that difference. Our rates increase. That represents about $3 million over this forecast period, as well as other increases for wages, specifically for settled contracts and things like that.
So you're saying that the gap that we see where it looks pretty positive between fiscal year 2020 actual and fiscal year 2022 year end, that gap that looks positive is CARES and ARPA. That's not the operating fee.
It's both. So it's the cumulative effect of ARPA and the operations fee combined. So if we were to do this display and peel out ARPA, you'd see that the expenditures were greater than the revenues. And in the same way, if you peel out the operations fee, you'd see that the expenditures were greater than the revenues also. So it has a cumulative effect.
And then when it comes to the 5-year forecast, we're saying now we'd be out of compliance with the policy in 2027, but had we not gotten CARES and had we not gotten ARPA, it would be 2025, it'd be 2024, it'd be something like that, it'd be sooner.
That's correct, it'd be much sooner. And just to be clear, the council fund balance policy of 15%, I don't think I have a slide for it, but let me just go back. So I believe the fund balance policy about 15%, it's around 24 million. So you'll see even with the current forecast, you drop below that policy pretty significantly in year 2025. So just to be clear, you're not meeting that policy well before the end of the forecast. And for the new members, if I can just take a second, fund balance is important for a couple of reasons. One, rating agencies take a look at that as a sign of your financial health. So when we go to sell bonds, we're talking about a $300 million bond currently. When they rate us, right now we're a AA2 from Moody's, we get a better interest cost. So we save taxpayers money by having that money in the fund balance, and we get a better interest rate. We save quite a bit of money, better premiums coming back. The other very important reason for fund balance is that in the general fund, that largest revenue, that $80 million revenue of property taxes, we don't start receiving that until November. So we have July through October that we have to cash flow before we get there. And even the 15% at that 24-ish million isn't enough. So we still go negative in October, just that 1 month, to pay those payroll expenses until we get those property tax receipts in November.
We have a question here from Mayor Bennett.
Thank you, Chair Stapleton. Josh, if we were to go back, this has always bothered me. I've been doing this budgeting for a couple of decades now, but if we went back, say 10 years and looked at that 5-year cash balance number, wouldn't we see we have at many years ago, actually, but certainly within this time period, right now have gone off that cash carryover objective, that 15% objective. I mean, that seems to be sort of a difficult problem that it just never happens. It's just forecasted.
We have gone negative in October. The cash has gone negative for the general fund. This
last October?
I'd have to check if this last October with the ARPA and CARES Act funding, I think we did a little bit better, but definitely the previous couple Octobers, we did go negative.
Because I'll go back and look at those, and we just have not gone to where this seems to always project us going into these large shortfalls or missing that 15% substantially. And I just want to kind of understand again what's going on there.
So I think that goes back to, I mentioned that strong financial management of the budget committee and the city council. So this financial forecast, it shows an issue, right? And that issue comes before the budget committee, it comes before the city council, and then action is taken, right? So the budget committee recommended new revenue, we added new revenue. It pushes off that imbalance further out, but we continue to see expenses increasing faster than revenues. So that's why we continue to have this issue. Operating in this constrained fiscal environment, you always have more needs than you have revenue for.
Yeah, the only thing I want to just mention, I've mentioned it many years over the years, is we're not here to keep money in the bank. We're here to provide services. And I want to be very confident, and I think the other members of the committee, I assume, would as well, that we're not banking tax money rather than delivering services that the constituents need and want at the same time. Do you see, are you finding the correct balance? I think what you're telling us is, yes, we are.
Yes, I believe so. So,
Okay.
so it's kind of a forced efficiency, right? You're forced to
Right.
keep this balance low. You see an issue, you solve the issue. But if that fund balance grows, I'm sure the city council will find a program to fund.
Well, the public would like to have a program to fund. I think saying the city council will find one. I think what we have is a public that expects a certain level of service and questions whether we're spending the tax money on services or what. So I think it's one of those things. I hope you'll keep us really closely posted if you see a change in that 15%.
Yeah, understood. I appreciate that question. It is something that we're looking to talk to the finance committee about, revisiting that 15%. But unfortunately, it would be an increase, not a decrease in that that percentage.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. That was great. Member Nordyke.
Thank you very much, Chair Stapleton. I echo the mayor's remarks. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for pointing that out. And I'll just say ditto to all of that. Josh, my question for you, I know we recently received, what was it, $11 to $13 million from the state of Oregon and various grant funding, $10.5 million for shelter, et cetera, some money for body cameras and some other one-time grant funding. Is that incorporated into our revenue and expenditure forecasting chart that you just had on screen a moment ago?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. The body cam revenue is incorporated into the forecast. So as you might remember, the city council added the budget authority for that, and then the legislature came back and added revenue to offset that budget authority. Originally, it was funded just from, called it that checking account, that fund balance. So once there was a funding source available, it offsets that expense. The other $10.5 million, that state grant for sheltering, is contained in the trust fund. So we received it in the trust fund. It's not reflected in this forecast at all.
Member Tigan.
Lost my mouse there, sorry. The mention of the trust fund sparked another question, but I guess I just want to acknowledge that when I read through the report, I had a hard time understanding how much, because the numbers are kind of all over the place, in that the CARES Act and ARPA funds were used throughout the system. Not that you didn't make it clear, but I had a hard time telling what was a reimbursement for a service that we usually provide, and what is money that we spent in the last 2 years on something we just have never done before, that the work continues to flow down to the jurisdiction of last result, or the jurisdiction of last choice, which is the city, to manage homelessness, to manage some things related directly to COVID. And I think that has to do with the gray line on our favorite chart. If we spent $8.1 million on homelessness services this year, we didn't spend $8.1 million on homelessness services in fiscal year 17. That is a brand new expense to the city. And is that something that we're going to continue to do and ask for funding from a higher jurisdiction in order to do? That's the part that concerns me about this gray line is I'm not sure it fully reflects all of the responsibility that we've taken on as a city in the last 2.5 years. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have, but we kind of have to stare it in the face for what it is if it's going to continue to be an ongoing cost. And maybe that $10 million in the trust account that you just mentioned is going to repair the budget in the way Member Bennett, described. It always gets repaired, right? But I'm a little uneasy that even the forecast says it's just kind of this nice, consistent, yet structural imbalance. And also when Mayor Bennett brought it up, I thought he was going to go like full Thelma and Louise in his last forecasting meeting and said, tell us we need to just drive off the cliff. But I'll set that aside for my serious point, which is, especially in the general fund and especially with the responsibilities the city's taking on, I think it's blurrier than it appears in that picture.
I hope I can clear it up for you. And I knew someone would have to have that reference. I was surprised the mayor didn't, but I'm glad you took care of it, Paul. So the homeless programs, they're funded with ARPA and the state grant. We don't have those in the general fund. It's not reflected here at all. So those programs, if they were to continue and it was an expense of the general fund, it would make this picture much, much worse. So this is a baseline forecast. It doesn't include those homeless programs. The ones that are reflected have an offsetting revenue. So they have a net zero impact to the general fund. So if that was a choice for the city council to continue funding those programs, the general fund could not sustain those in the out years.
Member Cohen?
I guess my response, can I just respond real quickly? I guess my response to that is, as a budget committee member, I'm happy to know that it's a zero impact on the budget. As a resident of the city, I don't think the impact on staff, on the service level of the city, or so many other things that are more meaningful than the budget in a lot of ways, I don't think the impact is net zero.
If I could clarify just real quick. So the sheltering pieces that have been added, funded by ARPA, that's a zero impact because they're funded with ARPA. In the general fund, we still have the HRAP program and we still have the general fund portion of those homeless services. We just don't have that, the services that are being funded by the external state grant and the ARPA fund.
Understood.
Thank you. Member Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. My question is it too early to speculate on federal monies to Salem with the recent passage of the infrastructure bill?
Yes and no. The infrastructure bill, it's a little different than what we saw with ARPA. So ARPA was a calculation, a formula based on population and other things. The infrastructure bill is largely looking at programs where you apply for grants and you receive grants for projects. So no direct allocation. And in general, it would be for capital expenses. And in the general fund, it's largely operating expenses, which wouldn't be eligible for those kind of funds.
Thank you. Member Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Josh, I was hoping that you could go into a little more specificity on the two categories you just mentioned. You talked about homeless programs that have offsetting ongoing revenue and programs that do not. Can you tell us specifically which programs are in which category? You talked about HRAP and another one, but could you spell all those out for me?
I'll attempt to. So the HRAP program, the Homeless Rental Assistance Program, is included in the forecast. The parks mitigation that we've been doing is included in the forecast. The vehicle camping is included in the forecast. Some of the smaller programs like Cash for Trash are included in the forecast. The Safe Sleep, Warming Network, those items are included in the forecast. It's really the micro shelters and the larger programs like that aren't included in the forecast.
Okay, I understand micro shelters, but micro shelters and what are the large programs would that be that aren't in there?
I believe kind of to be determined by the city council. We have a few different recommendations out there for the state grant that we'll be talking about at a work session on the 18th and then again with city council on the 24th. But the specific sites right now are Portland Road and the Catholic Community Services.
And where would the navigation center operation fall? Which list?
The Navigation Center has funding for the first few years with a grant from the state. We're still working to secure funding on the capital side to make sure the tenant improvements are made. We do have a deficit there. But again, no operating expenses or capital expenses from the Navigation Center are in the general fund forecast.
So the navigation center would be not in the same column as HREP, Safe Park, and all those. It's in the other one.
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
It's a really good clarification. Thanks for the questions, Member Hoy. Anybody else have something to add here? Member Lewis?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is the right time, but I'm just curious, Josh. We have a kind of a phenomenon happening right now with the number of people who seem to be quitting their jobs. It seems to be focused on the lower end jobs, and I'm wondering if the city is maybe immune from that issue because we don't do a lot of food service or hospitality, but I'm curious whether we are going to be affected or are being affected, and what that thought process went into the budget planning.
Good question. I see Krishna logged in. Maybe she can address that. Krishna Namburi, the Employee Enterprise and Technology Services Director. But just real quick, again, all the city positions are budgeted 100%. So if we saw some transition, some vacancy, it would appear as that kind of organic savings to the general fund. So that 2.5%, if we saw more, it would be a greater savings percent, and it would roll into that bank account and available for the council, the budget committee, to program for the next year.
Well, and actually that I understand that, but my concern is it appears in the private sector that wages are going to go up, especially at the low end. Is that been anticipated in the city's budget?
We did use a higher estimate for wages in the forecast. We did. We went from 2% to 3% cost of living adjustments in the forecast, higher than we've done the last several years to anticipate that change. But I'll let Krishna chime in if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. Good evening, Krishna Namburi. So Councillor, to answer your question, we are not immune from this situation. So what we have been doing, we are actually closely monitoring the situation, but we are also focusing quite a bit on the other benefits that we can offer to the employees. Like we are in the process of looking at some professional development opportunities and other ways to make sure we are the employer of the choice. And then we continue to kind of work in that path.
Well, the good news is by April, I think this situation should be a whole lot clearer than it is January 1st.
Agreed.
Here's hoping. Krishna, while you're here, I had a quick question. How has working from home, I'm guessing that is one of the benefits that we're using to keep folks and hopefully gain some good hires with that availability. Has that also led to cost savings at all in any way, or has it had the opposite effect?
For the employees, I think it has been a huge benefit, especially like working from home. And I know, especially for, all my departments, we are kind of allowing staff to 100% work remotely, and absolutely there is no impact on the operation side of it. And as far as the cost savings, we haven't seen that yet. I think we are still in that trial mode to see how this kind of pans out. So far, we haven't seen anything yet. But I'm pretty sure in the future, there are definitely some opportunities there.
Great, thank you. Member Hoy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Krishna, while you're still here, a kind of an offshoot of that, has there been any increased cost to the employees, or have we seen requests for any sort of, whether it's setting up workstations, whether it's whatever it might be at home for people to actually do work that traditionally would have been done in a city facility? Has there been any impact there on staff?
There isn't impact to the staff, Counselor. We actually provided, the laptops for everyone that is working from home. And some employees did request like monitors at home, and we have provided them. So to the employees, there is no additional cost. But we were able to strategically plan our equipment purchases to make sure the staff working from home are provided with everything that they need to be able to do the remote work.
Thank you.
I have a feeling that's the wave of the future. I welcome. I think it's a great development. Any other? Yes. Any other questions right now for staff? Seeing none. Josh, do you have the next? I'm guessing we're not through this yet.
Just 3 more slides. You've seen this this display for the previous 2 funds. This is the forecast variability for the general fund. As you might expect, the blue represents the previous displays. The green just makes it a little bit better. And as you can see, the red is worse. And again, this is a 2% positive impact and 2% negative impact. And again, this just shows how sensitive the fund is in general to fluctuations. So like the pandemic, if we saw a multiple percent decrease in revenues, you would see this red happen right here. But at the same time, if you saw a 2% increase in revenues, it could be the green bars. And we've seen both through the pandemic. We've seen some revenues increase and some revenues decrease. This slide is just a placeholder. I wanted to give the budget committee an opportunity to discuss some topics that would be helpful to present in depth during your meeting in April and May. In the past, we've done a deeper dive into topics such as PERS and property taxes. A couple of things that I've heard that might be helpful is some clarity around ARPA and CARES, and really some detail there about how it's spent or how it will be spent. And then maybe some clarity around homeless costs in general. So I don't know, Chair Stapleton, if you want to have more topics that I can make sure we prepare for April and May.
Yeah, if you could unshare your screen, and then maybe we can give us a moment to think. It looks like Member Tigan has something to add as well.
Thank you, Chair. And some of this has to be a little bit dry because it's budgeting, but I am really curious about, and this is kind of, I guess with CARES and ARPA and now with the state funding, I am really curious to learn more about how these trust accounts work. Last year during the budgeting process, and I'm kind of looking through this on page 9, kind of the timeline of how the money came in, we made a conscious decision as a budget committee to allocate any of those, or to budget any of those funds that came in through ARPA into those trust accounts. Just so we could say it was fully budgeted, and then left it to the city council to determine how to spend it. That's the relationship that I'm okay with. But I don't know how much money is in those trust accounts, or how much work it represents that the city's taken on by accepting that funding, whether it is to help run the navigation center or whatever the case may be. I think the other part, so maybe information on how the trust accounts work and how money gets into them and what their impact is on city operations would be good for us to know, because that seems to be kind of a consistent theme. If money is showing up from higher jurisdictions for us to do stuff with, like I said earlier, I think there's an impact there. I think the other part of it, and that's all I have for information topics. I think more on the trust accounts.
And if I could address one of those questions right now. So the trust accounts is simply our trust and agency line. It's money that's held from someone else for a specific purpose. So it's nothing special. It's simply a holding account. Specifically, the budget committee, you allocated, I think it was $10.7 million in that trust account. When the budget got to the city council, they took $8.1 million and put it towards sheltering, and $2.3 million for affordable housing. So it pretty much fully allocated that trust fund amount for those specific purposes. And we can break those down, but it's kind of ongoing. It's an ongoing discussion as sheltering sites are discussed. So originally it was one set of shelter sites, and different shelter sites are being considered currently. We'll definitely come back. We can provide you very clearly the ARPA funds, and at least in April we'll have a very good idea of the state grant as well, how that will be spent.
Vice Chair Brown.
Thanks, Chair Stapleton. So Josh, so on page 9, and I think I'm probably saying the very same thing that Paul just said, and I may be asking the wrong question, so I'm putting that out there first. I may be asking the wrong question. So on page 9, in the second paragraph, do you see where it says, is the second sentence, during the fiscal year of 2020, the fund balance grew by 2.8 million, due in large part to the reimbursement grant and so forth and so on. So if it grew by 2.8 million, did you explain to us how we use that 2.8 million? Or did I overlook that somewhere?
So the 2.8 million in fiscal year 2020 was anticipated in the budget. So when we anticipate that, it gets rolled into that fund balance. So if you were to look at a line item budget, it would say beginning working capital fund balance. It just rolls into that checking account as a resource for the city to budget from.
So it goes into the general fund?
That's correct. The CARES Act funding is a reimbursement for allowable uses for those funding. So in that case, it was a presumption for police services and other direct COVID expenses.
Got it. And so, and again, I'm just going to preface this by saying this may not be the right question to ask. And I think Paul may have said this earlier. So if the 8.1 million of the ARPA funds goes toward sheltering services, the 8.1 million, what happens 5 years from now? I mean, is that the right question to ask, or is that the wrong question to ask?
It's almost the right question. It's more like what happens in 2 to 3 years. But yes, it's a good question.
Because won't we just have nothing and we'll just have to go in? It's almost like you have to rob Peter to pay for Paul. Am I saying that right? And no pun to you, Paul, but you got to rob somebody to pay this.
So I'm gonna go back to something I said earlier. So in the general fund, this constrained fiscal environment, if you want to add a program that doesn't have funding, you're going to end a different program or you're going to increase revenue. You have two levers: increase revenue or decrease expenses.
Got it. And the city councilors, they're the governing body that looks at those programs to say, we're going to keep this, we're going to stop paying for this, right?
So the city manager proposes a budget to the budget committee. This body makes a recommendation to city council. So it would be within the budget committee's purview to change that recommendation. When it gets to city council, they have certain limitations about what they can change. So it's kind of both budget committee and city council, kind of a cooperation.
Got it. And sometime between now and the next year, this team will be able to see that list of programs, right?
Yes, we list all the programs in the budget book. So even for the current year, you could pull up the book we gave you last year and you'd see all the city programs listed there, fully expended.
Got it. And I went back to the big book. It was a real thick one, correct?
Yes.
So I went back and I looked in there. So here's my $1 million question. Now it's not worth $1 million. So I'm just saying that it's not worth $1 million, but I'm going to say it anyway. So suppose in this next year, there is a new program, and suppose, I'm just going to pick on Chair Stapleton. Suppose she's looking at a program through her DEI lens and she says, hey, this is something that the city can benefit from to help, our homeless community. Will we be able to find money for that? Especially if it aligns with our DEI focus and mission of the city. Will we be able to find money for that particular program that she's proposing?
It's a good question. And so one of the tools that we have for you to make that determination is the 5-year forecast. So what we would do is we would take that 5-year forecast, we'd layer on whatever programs you're considering as the budget committee or city council. You would see the impact of that program. You would see, okay, it's going to cost $100,000 a year for the forecast period. It's $500,000. Are we okay with the result? So currently in the 5-year forecast, you're already ending pretty close. You're depleting the fund balance. So are we okay with depleting it faster? And that's really a determination for the budget committee and the city council.
Got it. Okay. Thank you so much for that clarity. I appreciate it. Thank you, Chair Stapleton.
Member Nordike?
I just want to echo what some of my colleagues are saying, because it's kind of hard when we're not all in the same room. It's easier to do kind of the affirmative nods and body language to indicate support or confusion, disagreement, etc. And I just want to echo what Member Brown and Member Teigen are pointing out, which is that I think we all would like more clarity on, I think, what people would call really the discretionary and potential programs, right? I think the vast majority of a city budget is rather uncontroversial, sewer, water, public safety, et cetera. I mean, most of these items are not really controversial on a year in, year out basis. It really comes down to the programs, the pet projects, the novel and innovative ideas, and what to do when all of a sudden the state gives us a grant in the amount of $10.5 million that we weren't anticipating. And when that money gets shuffled into a trust account, it creates a lot of obscurity as to what money we really have. What can we really do with those funds? So I just want to echo a desire for greater clarity and understanding. Where are all these pots of money? How can we use them? What can they be used for? And so on. And so I just want to echo the desire to have greater clarity on what the CARES funding can be used for and what all these other pots of money are really available for in the months to come.
Understood. And the trust account, to hold it separate, was really an intent to have that clarity. So for it not to be commingled with the general fund. So it's very clear what those funds are being used to fund once the city council determines that.
Thank you. Member Source?
Thank you, Chair. Josh, I'm going to ask for information for the spring. This might not be fair to you and your team, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I would like to see, the pandemic. We always hear that the pandemic has probably forever changed how we do things. So I think it would be interesting and super helpful for this committee to kind of forecast how people are going to interact with the city post-pandemic. Are things going to change? Are the way that we as citizens of Salem interacting with our city staff going to be different from now on based on from before the pandemic? Are permits going to be less because there's less commercial need for commercial real estate because now more people are working from home, et cetera, and how that might impact the budget in different ways. One of the things I'm thinking of is I know that state employees haven't been downtown, so there's probably less parking tickets that code enforcement and the police are giving out because less state workers illegally parking or whatever, So like, what are the ways that we as citizens, are we going to change the way we interact with the city? And are there ways for us to get ahead of that, to be smart and maybe save some money in the future without losing the service that our community members expect the city to be providing? And I think if we think about that now and spend a couple months, even though it's probably unfair of you guys to try to think and be that, look into the crystal ball, maybe we can get a little ahead of some of the concerns we might have moving forward. Thank you.
It's a good question. We can certainly attempt to anticipate changes that might impact the budget. There are a couple efforts underway that could help with that. One, we're looking at a customer service center that's currently being designed that'll change the way the public interacts. Accepting finance payments and other other registrations all in one place, and both allowing virtual interaction as well as in-person interaction. The other thing that I think might be helpful is we're looking at a performance management platform where we'll have performance metrics available for the public. I think that could speak to some of that service level that hasn't changed, actually. So some of our core services, police, fire, court, public works, code, they're still busy. The service level really hasn't changed for the majority of the city.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to ask you to look into something for me. And that is that this budget that we're looking at now is for the services that we're providing, the service levels that we're providing that at right now. But I'm wondering where we are needing to grow in our employee base. Where are the needs that are not being voiced or that are kind of something that is becoming a problem? I want to see where that's at right now with the city so that we can really look at this holistically as we're moving forward to know what's coming down the chute for the different needs in all the different departments. I think that would be an important thing to include. Member Phillips?
Thank you, Chair Stapleton. Josh, forgive me for having this kind of clunky in my brain right now, but I'm curious as to if there will be any anticipated impact on, the yearly operational budget if we're successful in our campaign to get an infrastructure bond passed in 2022. Will there be any potential savings, in regards to, public works and streets and transportation or any other parts of the budget?
Good question. I'm going to see if Public Works Director Fernandez would care to weigh in on that one.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Phillips. The answer is not really. We could, for example, allocate some, since we're looking at a 10-year bond, one idea might be to allocate, $10 million, or $20 million. So the $2 million a year that we're spending on sidewalks would go to capital, to the bond, and then that would save us money in the Public Works Fund. That's really the only thing I can think of for now that would, because what we have is operational issues, and you can't really spend bond money on operational issues. So that's the only one that, just off the top of my head would work. But for the most part, the answer is no.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Mayor Bennett?
Thank you, Chair. Peter, I'd like to follow up on that a little bit. On the parks portion of the bond measure, how much, or is there a portion of the general fund that goes into parks that can be replaced by bond funds, or is it pure operations that are happening at the general fund level?
Yeah, again, Mayor, there's a little bit of money that goes to, equipment replacement. There's a little bit of money that goes into the SPIF funds. Yeah. All capital. But those are really pretty, especially in parks, those are really very small amounts. So in theory, there'll be some operational savings because, hey, some of the restrooms that will replace will be new, and we might replace some tennis courts that we otherwise would spend operational dollars. So, there's things like that, but they're really pretty small compared to, as Josh has said throughout the presentation, our biggest expense are people, and capital funds can't be used to fund people.
Okay, thanks.
And if I may, just to follow up, a lot of the major parks projects are funded with TOT. So it's a separate funding source. So there could be savings in TOT as opposed to savings in the general fund.
And TOT's a fairly elastic fee, right? That you can use those funds for operational expenses. Isn't that how that works?
We do use some of it for operating expenses for parks, for the regional parks, those parks that have a tourism benefit. So right. For people who don't know, I should have said the transient occupancy tax, or the hotel motel tax.
Right. but it's a flexible, when we get that money into our funds, when it does move, parts of it do move into our funds, they tend to be pretty flexible dollars, right?
Within reason, yes, there are some restrictions.
Okay.
Thank you. Member Tigan?
Thank you, Chair. A couple questions for Director Fernandez, just on where we're at in the year planning cycle for the CIP. That'll be presented to the Budget Committee in a couple months. Are you still accepting submissions for the coming year is question number one. And will the work that's anticipated if the infrastructure bond is passed, are we going to see that some of that early development, I should say, kind of later in the fiscal years of the CIP?
So for the first question is, yes, you can, we accept project ideas at any time. So those can just be submitted. Tammy Stars, so T Stars with 2 R's at Salem.net is our CIP coordinator. And I know she goes out to different neighbor associations and has that conversation with them over various months. So, but yes, you can always submit and we will see where it lands. We have a lot of projects in the CIP, so or in master plan. So usually we've thought about those projects. Once a bond, we're going to have to, so it's related to the bond, we're going to have to spend some money as we develop the bond as the council subcommittee, and then the council looks at the list to develop cost estimates. So we're already looking at that, and we're going to have a fairly short turnaround to do that. That's aside from the CIP. That's just budgetary items. Once the bond is passed, and there'll be a list of projects on there, then we will work with the council to lay out the projects over. Some will be, the CIP is only 5 years. So, and there's a 10-year bond. So some projects will be in years 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then we'll have to think about, do we just have an appendix to the CIP that says, hey, these projects have funds available from the bond, but they're not yet in the 5-year cycle. So we'll have to think about that a little bit. We've never been in that. That'll be a great problem to have. So we've never been in that situation. But yes, they will all show up in the CIP.
Well, I think with just a response to that is with so much, anticipated rezoning of mixed use areas, State Street, there's lots of places where some vision has been applied to the city. And it seems like the CIP is going to be a place for the city to acknowledge that we're going to do work in those places to support those zoning changes, that are proposed at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. If there, so there's a couple of issues there that you brought up. Typically, projects that are associated with growth are SDC funded, and
right.
And those projects show up in the CIP and show up as SDC funded projects, or show up as developer reimbursements because developers have fronted the money to pay for them. There are also projects that are, if they're already in the CIP, they're already funded. So a bond would, hey, instead of using the source of funds that we have, we would use bond funds, or projects are in master plans that would be brought forward to then be funded by the bond. But right now, yes, what you're alluding to is the changes from our Salem. Council will adopt our Salem, and those zoning changes will occur. But today, there's no money to pay for the additional infrastructure. That will either be addressed by SDC's rates or the future bond measures.
Okay.
And just for everyone's reference, if you go to the city website and you type bond, it's the Salem Community Bond. They have a button where you can suggest projects. And similarly, if you go to the CIP or Capital Improvement Plan page, there's a similar button where you can submit a project also.
Thank you. Member Brown, did you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Chair. So Josh, I have a couple of questions. I just need a little bit of clarity. And Mr. Mayor said this earlier, it's in regards to TOTS. And so when I was reading about TOTS it's on page 48 at the very bottom of page 48, talks about TOTS in regards to that in the past year, we took in over $500,000. And then it ends with that, there's so many unknowns as we still kind of go through the pandemic. How do we use all that money again?
Oh, good question. So the top fund, and that's something that we could go over more in depth in April. But there's a portion that goes to parks operating, like we mentioned before. Some goes to marketing at the convention center. Some go to grant operators for events in the city. That's a large portion. For events in the city, and then also the historic building operators. And that's something we could go in more detail in April. If that's
perfect. And in the follow-up from that, the chair, she mentioned about the workforce. So when I go to page 20, on page 20, this speaks to what she had said. On page 20, the very last paragraph, the first sentence says to recruit qualified candidates and a sustained skilled workforce. It looks like we want to have 4 full-time career positions. Will you let us know in April where those positions are going to be housed at? Like, where will they live?
And you're talking, is that the transportation fund?
Well, I'm thinking it is a transportation fund. It has to be the transportation fund.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think we can answer that one. I mean, we can certainly bring back information, Dr. Brown, but those are, that is in Fund 155. Those are positions that are currently funded by seasonal funds. What we're finding is that we're having a heck of a time finding seasonal employees for various reasons. So what we want to do is we want to convert those dollars to full-time positions to be able to address a number of needs. And our new supervisor in streets is just doing an excellent job of rethinking the way we provide service. So there is I don't remember if it's a net zero or a slight increase in cost to do that change and really be able to provide the services that we haven't been able to because we just can't find seasonal employees.
Got it. And I think it'll be important for us to, and I think we said this last year, but as we think about our workforce, how do we want to diversify our workforce? And I'm going to unpack the word diversify because I am really talking about hiring more women and people of color. And so that's something that I'm just going to hold us to over and over and over again until we have a city that represents all of the citizens that are here. And so I know people may get tired of hearing Dr. Brown say that, but I'm going to keep on saying it because in the skin that I am in and the role that I play, we have to have more courageous conversations about our employing strategies and what we're doing to make this place be more welcoming, right? And I think that the word inclusive is on every single one of our pages in this book. It's like, how do we make the city more inclusive? So that's just a side note. Another follow-up question, Peter, this is something you can probably answer. With the short session coming around here in a matter of weeks, is there any type of legislation that we're pushing forward to get more money, or is that something that we'll talk about later on?
Excellent question. I'm going to see if City Manager Powers wants to respond or Courtney Knox-Bush.
Especially since we're talking about money, and I know for a fact that the short session will talk a lot about money. So I want to make sure that the City of Salem has our name in the hat.
Yeah, thank you, Steve Powers, City Manager. Thank you for that question. Yeah, the Legislative Committee of Council and then City Council itself has been very aggressive in securing state funding, and I expect that's going to continue during a short session, a long session, or a mini session. And our Legislative Committee of Council will be developing specific proposals. Perhaps the chair of that committee, Mayor Bennett, or Courtney Knox, who staffs that, could speak to any specific proposals that have been prepared, but we'll certainly be ready to have our needs before the legislature.
Okay. Well, thank you for that clarity. Feels like I'm using a lot of my airtime up, so let me speed on ahead through here. So Josh, one more thing. When we look at transportation, I think Mr. Mayor said this last year, the transportation fund, you remember how last year we talked about redoing sidewalks throughout the city? I think it was a huge conversation that we all talked about sidewalk repair. Do we know exactly the plan to repair sidewalks? Like, where will we start the sidewalk repair? Does that start on the west side? Does that start on the east side? Because I think it came up last year, if I'm not mistaken, right, Chair? We had a huge conversation about sidewalks and where does the work start? Do we know where the sidewalk repair will begin?
Yes, we do. We know exactly where we're going to repair. We have an exacting plan. It is primarily driven by ADA requirements and ADA laws that our superintendent is expert at. And that plan is sometimes impacted by other requests or discovery of other improvement needs where there is a greater ADA requirement, but it is wholly driven by those requirements.
All by ADA.
All by ADA.
Okay, and my last question is, and I think I can find it. It's on page 20 and 21. We refer to the sidewalk response team quite a bit. Who is the sidewalk response team?
Yeah,
I'm just curious. Who is that? I know it's not me. I mean, who's on the team?
No, they're employees. The side it's what I referred to earlier that Mark Bechtel had nicknamed the Flying Squad. So the response team is a small crew that addresses quick issues where there's a tripping hazard, there's a couple of panels that need to be corrected. So we for a long time we had one crew that was just deliberately following the plan. These ADA issues that I talk about. The response team is there to address small, quick issues. So they zip in, they correct a tripping hazard, anything else that is small, a couple of panels, and then they move on to the next issue. So that we're not waiting for the big group to come back around.
Got it. And this is a team, and you know who all these people are on the team.
Well, they're employed by the city of Salem, yes.
I see Mayor Bennett raising his hand.
I cannot tell you their names right at the moment because I have 450 employees, but yes, they are my employees.
Got it. Mayor Bennett, what were you going to say?
Thank you. I had a separate question, but I think his name is Brandon, is the guy I always run into. So Brandon's over on 15th Street right now in Stapleton in my ward, working on 15th Street. So
got it.
I did want to go back, if I could, Madam Chair, just briefly, and have Courtney maybe tell you where the legislative committee is. I think the question Dr. Brown is asking is one that the committee might want to be aware of the funding we're asking for from the short session of the legislature. And then Representative Hoy is with us, and he may have his shopping list as well. So it just, I think it's important to know, Dr. Brown, that for many years, the city of Salem did not ask for money. They asked for a lot of kind of policy stuff. We changed that when I became mayor, and all we do is ask for money most of the time. And that's all I can figure out they're there for. So we do quite a bit of funding requests, and we've been very successful. But Courtney, do you have that list with you?
I do. Thank you, Mayor Bennett. On December 13th, the City Council received a report from the city's legislative committee, and it highlighted the 4 top priorities for the short session in terms of funding that the city is going to put forward. The first is to complete the construction of the navigation center, which we've already discussed this evening a little bit. The second is to, and this is not a funding initiative, but this is more to secure some flexible response from the state of Oregon when we ask if we can borrow a property for sheltering use. They right now are hoping they could be a little more flexible than they have to date. We're also seeking some funding to construct a regional 911 center. You may or may not be aware, but the city's WVCC, the Willamette Valley Communications Center, provides dispatch services for 29 police and fire agencies. We were asked to regionalize several years ago by the legislature, and that's been a great gift. And yet it kind of prevents us from using bond funding to build a new one. And so we need some support from them to be able to build a new facility that's earthquake safe and can keep that service going. The last one is another interesting thing. You may not be aware, but we're going to celebrate 50 years of the city's Civic Center in a birthday party of sorts, or an anniversary party on August 18th of 2022. So do keep in mind that there'll be an invitation coming shortly. And for that, we're asking for a little bit of help to make that space, the Peace Plaza space and the adjoining areas, much more presentable for the birthday party. So that's fourth on the list. But again, the first priority is to secure the missing funding for the navigation center construction. The second is to get a little bit more flexibility around how the state allows us to share their properties for homeless sheltering. The third is the construction of the regional 911 center. So those are the priorities we're going to seek this session.
And then Councillor Hoy did you want to talk about yours, Chris, at all?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd be happy to just talk about two legislative concepts that I am working on. One is directly in support of the second priority, which would free up some state property for city use for siting our micro shelter and or safe park sites. That would just streamline that process and make some property available to us that we think would be really appropriate for that. That's certainly being underutilized currently within the city. And the second one, which is much bigger sort of ask for a short session, would be some sort of payment in lieu of taxes for our public safety services. Being the state capital, if you look around the country, it's very common in state capitals throughout the country to receive some sort of payment in lieu of taxes, because we have quite a number of facilities, state hospitals, state penitentiaries, a lot of different burdens or uses of our public safety services, including police, fire, and 911, that we're not receiving taxes for. And we estimate that if you just look at the state property, it's about 5.1 million out of our general fund every year that we're not getting receiving taxes for, but yet we are providing public safety services to those buildings. And so I'm hoping to sort of have a predictable amount of revenue for the city that would come from the state every year that we could count on for budgeting purposes to help provide public safety within the city.
Great, thanks everyone. That was a fantastic conversation. Vice Chair Brown, I wanted to also respond to your words. One, I promise I will get your title correct eventually in these meetings. I apologize. Two, I want everybody here to feel comfortable taking up the amount of space that they need and to ask the questions that they need to ask. So please don't ever feel like you are being restricted or that you need to maybe ask less questions. I want to make sure that this is a really welcoming and inviting place for folks to be. I also wanted to thank the Legislative Committee for all their work. I feel really supported by them as a city councilor, and I know they're also city councilors and mayors, of course. But thank you for all your hard work. It does not go unnoticed. And two more things. I want to echo what Vice Chair Brown brought up about diversity in our hiring, but also to include those things that maybe aren't seen so much. Folks from our LGBTQIA+ community, I want to make sure that we have a good representation there, and those who are differently abled as well. Those are things that I'm very passionate about, as I know many of you are here as well. And lastly, we brought up the dispatch center, and that was something that I was trying to also bring up with looking at future employee, adding employees, because I know that they are under a lot of stress there, and increasing the folks that work for us in that area would be a good investment in our city and in our infrastructure that way. I think I got it all. I made little notes as the conversation went, but that was a great question and answer and creative energy flowing there with lots of good information shared. Is there anything else that we would like to ask staff to maybe dig a little deeper on and help us understand better? Seeing none. Josh, did you have one more slide? I think I counted 2 that went by.
Yeah, just one more, and all it has on there are next steps. So it's a good one. Council policy agenda adoption is coming up here in January. It'll help inform the city manager and the leadership team as the proposed budget for the budget committee is developed. Budget development by departments. So the budget ends up being one number, but it's made up of a lot smaller numbers that come from department analysts. So they'll be crunching those numbers. I know larger departments are already working on it. Budget committee members, we're planning on 4 meetings, April 20th, 27th, May 4th, May 11th. And then we always publish an alternate just in case we can't get a budget recommendation, but we really try not to use that on May 18th. And then after that recommendation comes from the budget committee, it goes to the council for budget adoption in June. So those are the next steps. And I'm happy to answer any additional questions there might be.
Great, thank you, Josh. Is there any further questions? And of course, any staff you can email staff with questions that are coming up later. You can add things as we think of them. Member Source.
Thank you, Chair. And this could just be because I'm the new guy, so I'll just take it as that. But is staff gonna, if I work better with paper, can the staff provide me a book, or is it my obligation to print out the thousands of pages of paper that is the City of Salem's budget?
We'll make sure we provide everyone with the budget book for the forecast. We're still happy to drop off a hard copy if you'd like it, but for the budget book, we want to make sure everyone has a hard copy, unless you don't want one. And please let us know if you don't, and we won't drop one off.
Thank you.
It's a great question. And by dropped off, do you mean dropped off at our homes or dropped off at City Hall to be picked up? Just to clarify.
We'll deliver them to your homes unless you happen to be coming to City Hall, and you're welcome to pick it up there.
Great, thank you. Okay. Well, we'll move on with our agenda. We have no public hearings, and thanks to this wonderful presentation by Josh, we have taken care of our special orders of business and had a great discussion, I think. So next on our agenda is a space for public testimony on future budget issues. As with the earlier testimony period, each speaker will have 3 minutes and staff will indicate when you have 1 minute left. Has anyone signed up to provide public comment?
No, they haven't, Madam Chair.
Great. Well, that is the conclusion of our meeting. Our next scheduled meeting will take place virtually on Wednesday, April 20th, 2022. And seeing no other hands raised or any other, oh, I love it. Vice Chair Brown.
It's always me. I do want to say just a couple of things. Just appreciation to Officer Eggleston and his team. I know you all, we know you do all a lot of work. And so hats off to you and your team for just, you know, the labor intensive it takes to put all these facts together and analysis and charts. So kudos to you and your team, especially for hanging out so late with us, because some of us can be long-winded, and I'm going to look at Paul and not me. And so we like to talk, and also thanking former Chair Tyken just for his service, being a part of this team. So definitely thank you to you, and just appreciation for the people that are working behind the scenes so much. So again, thank you so much.
Yes, the more we get to work and see, the more thankful I am for folks who serve on committees and city staff and my fellow councilors and mayor. So with that, thank you all. This meeting is adjourned.
Good night.
For more videos and for more information, go to capitalcommunitymedia.org and follow us on social media.
It's time for Local Roots, music from Northwest artists.